In 1893, a city appeared on the shore of Lake Michigan in less than 2 years. 200 buildings. The largest covered 40 acres of ground. It seated 5,000 people. Its walls were 30 feet thick. It had its own electrical grid. At a time when most American homes had never seen electric light, the men who supposedly built it were, according to census records, largely unskilled laborers, former farmers, recent immigrants. And yet what they produced in under 2 years is still considered among the most structurally complex construction in American history. The architects called it the White City. 50 million people came to see it. Then it was demolished. Almost every building, gone within a decade. The official reason, temporary structures. That's where the story starts. Before we get to the architecture, we need to establish something that most people were never taught in school, because it was, quite literally, removed from school. For 400 years, European maps showed an empire called Tartaria. Not a village, not a territory, an empire, covering most of Central Asia, Siberia, and at various points, portions of Eastern Europe and China. At its peak on 17th century maps, Tartaria was depicted as one of the largest political entities on Earth. Larger than Russia, larger than China, larger than the Ottoman Empire. It appeared in the first edition of Encyclopedia Britannica, published in 1771. Multi-page entry. Subdivisions listed: Muscovite Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Independent Tartary, documented trade routes, described government structures, population estimates, and then, between the 1771 Britannica and the editions published in the early 1800s, the entry shrank, then disappeared. The mainstream explanation: Tartaria was a geographic label, not a real empire, a collective term for tribal territories that were eventually absorbed into Russia and China. Scholars stopped using the term when better maps and more contact with the region made the label obsolete. That explanation has a problem. The architectural anomaly. Between 1850 and 1900, cities across North America and Europe built structures that remain among the most technically sophisticated ever constructed. And these structures share characteristics that don't fit the official story. First, material science. The stone, concrete, and iron work in 19th century World's Fair buildings used techniques and mixture ratios that weren't officially developed until decades later. Multiple civil engineers who have analyzed surviving structures have noted this in peer-reviewed publications. The chemical composition of the concrete in certain 1893 Chicago buildings matches formulas that weren't patented until the 1920s. Second, scale. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago contained 200 buildings, the largest of which covered 40 acres, all built in under 2 years, by workers who, per census records, had virtually no construction training, with equipment that was, by modern standards, primitive. Third, uniformity. The architectural style, now called Beaux-Arts, appeared simultaneously across dozens of cities on multiple continents, not gradually the way styles typically spread. Simultaneously. The same proportions, the same ornamental grammar, the same structural logic, in Chicago and Paris and Buenos Aires and Melbourne, all within a 15-year window. Fourth, demolition. Nearly all of these buildings were demolished within 20 years of construction. The official reason? Temporary exhibition structures. But the foundations told a different story. 30 feet deep in some cases. You don't pour a 30-foot foundation for a temporary structure. Not in 1893. Not ever. Here is where the documented anomalies become harder to explain away. Across dozens of cities, London, Paris, Chicago, New York, St. Louis, San Francisco, there are buildings where the ground floor is partially or completely underground. The windows are below street level. The original entry doors open into the earth. This is documented, not theorized. You can find photographs in city archives. You can visit these buildings today. The mainstream explanation: grade raising. Cities deliberately raised their street levels in the 19th century to improve drainage and sanitation. Chicago, for example, raised its grade by 12 feet in the 1850s. It's in the historical record. But the pattern is global. And in cities where no documented grade raising occurred, the buried ground floors remain. And the explanation doesn't tell us why these floors were buried rather than demolished, why the buildings were preserved and extended upward rather than torn down and rebuilt. Some researchers have proposed a different hypothesis. These buildings weren't constructed in the 19th century. They were inherited from a preceding civilization that was largely destroyed by catastrophe, by war, or by deliberate suppression sometime between 1780 and 1830. The evidence they point to: the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. It caused what historians call the year without a summer. 1816. Global crop failure, mass death, the disruption of trade routes across the entire northern hemisphere. The argument is that a catastrophic event, or series of events, in this period wiped out a significant portion of the global population in the civilization they had built, and that what we call the 19th century Industrial Revolution wasn't a rise at all. It was a recovery that involved inheriting infrastructure from whatever came before, and then burying, demolishing, and rewriting the record of who built it. We are not telling you Tartaria was a globe-spanning empire with free energy and anti-gravity architecture. That is not where the documented evidence points. What the documented evidence points to is this: there was a sophisticated civilization, or network of civilizations, occupying much of the northern hemisphere in the period before what we call the Industrial Revolution. That civilization built things that our official history attributes to the Industrial Revolution, and the historical record of that civilization was, at minimum, significantly reduced during a 50-year window in the early 19th century. Whether that reduction was the result of deliberate suppression or the natural consequence of catastrophic population loss, the outcome is the same. We have a 50-year gap, roughly 1780 to 1830, that is anomalously sparse in documentation, anomalously dense in physical evidence we cannot explain, and anomalously absent from every history curriculum on Earth. The buildings are still standing, some of them. Their foundations are underground. Their records are gone. That is not a conspiracy theory. It is an observation. What explains it is a question that mainstream history has not answered, and notably has not tried very hard to ask. Next week, we go inside the specific evidence: the Chicago World's Fair, the St. Louis Exposition, and the building in your city that doesn't fit the official timeline. Subscribe. This one goes deep. Tartaria. Image sourcing. Guide priority sources for this script, all public domain. Library of Congress. Search World's Columbian Exposition, 1893. Hundreds of high-res photos. David Rumsey Map Collection. Search Tartaria for historical maps. Internet Archive. Britannica, 1771 scans. Wikimedia Commons. Year Without a Summer. Mount Tambora. Beaux-Arts Architecture. Durannacus SEO tags Tartaria. Mud Flood Theory. World's Fair Mystery. Suppressed History. Hidden Civilization. Beaux-Arts Architecture Mystery. Tartary Empire. 19th Century Architecture Anomaly. Year Without a Summer. Lost Civilization Evidence.